Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald at the Illinois State Museum in Springfield. You probably have heard by now there's a big anniversary coming up commemorating the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Many local groups are involved in this, and one of the local groups is the Illinois State Museum, who has started a commemorative exhibit for that 150th anniversary. And this is a very interesting space that they have produced here at the Illinois State Museum in downtown Springfield. And Bonnie Stiles, you had this remarkable part of the art museum, and you thought to ourselves, let's use this for maybe special occasions, huh?
That's right. I mean, we carved out this space and made what we're calling our temporary permanent gallery. Temporary because it changes more often, and permanent because in this space we only show works from the permanent collection.
So the neat thing is these are things that people would never get a chance to see otherwise, probably, right?
Rarely seen objects.
Yeah.
It gives us another transitional space that allows us to feature elements from the collection that we can't frequently show because we simply don't have enough transitional space. So
we always think, or I always think, I can't speak for everybody, but I think of you as a natural history organization, as an art museum. I don't think about history in Lincoln, but you got it, don't you?
We do have history. So we're actually land, life, people, and art of Illinois, and so history is actually a very strong component within the museum. We tell the story of history through the Native American heritage and through our large decorative arts collection, which are objects that hold rich stories of Illinois history.
So for this period of time, you've been, I mentioned the coalition, the funeral coalition, the reenactment coalition. Lots of local groups are involved in that. You've been involved with it from the beginning, and this was part of your contribution to that whole effort.
That is correct. So we looked for something that we could do that only we could do. And that is actually looking at depictions of Lincoln through art. And we had the collections. When our director for art, Jim Zimmer, started really scanning the collections for what we had, we were able to pull together this fantastic collection of objects that tell stories of really depictions of Lincoln in art.
And it's our good fortune that Jim Zimmer is here today. So when we go through this thing object by object, he chose them.
Yes.
He in many cases wrote the background for for the exhibit, and he'll know all about it. So we're going to take a little tour with him. Is that okay?
Very good.
Okay.
He did a tremendous amount of research for this exhibit.
Thanks, Bonnie.
You're welcome.
Jim Zimmer, the first thing you see when you enter this exhibit is this Rogers group, and Rogers, he sculpted a large number of these, and this was just one of his sort of, somebody might have this in their front parlor at their home or something. Huh?
In fact, they were made specifically for that. What are referred to as Rogers groups. The artist was John Rogers, and he did several that were sort of everyday scenes, but he did also a whole series on Civil War sculptures like this one. Here we have Lincoln seated looking at one of the maps, and standing next to him on his right-hand side is Grant, and Stanton is standing behind him.
Stanton would have been his Secretary of War at the
Correct,
time. Huh?
That is correct. And an interesting part of this, of course, this was made shortly after Lincoln was assassinated. This is from 1868, but both Stanton and Grant were still alive, and Rogers had the opportunity to meet with them to talk about what their meetings were like and to get that kind of information, and of course also use their life images as a way of creating the sculpture.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you're in the room when you look at this thing.
You do.
You kind of feel like you're off sort of listening in and eavesdropping on their plans, don't you?
These were very popular, as you mentioned. They were often shown in Victorian parlors. They became a center point of the parlors. They were inexpensive. So it was a way of creating artwork that most any family could have in their parlor and show off. They sold for, this one would have been at the top end, it sold for about $25.
Wow.
It's made of plaster and would have been painted this color originally. We think this is the original paint on this. However, Rogers encouraged the people who bought these to paint them however they might work best in the color scheme in their parlors.
Let's go over and look at this quilt. I like this because the woman that made this quilt is now, I think you said she's 92 years
She's 100.
old? She's 100, and she's still alive.
And she's still alive, yes. She's still alive.
Wow.
This quilt was made in 1992. And it's, this is one of the objects that comes from our decorative arts collection. We have many quilts. And we have actually multiple ones that are Lincoln themed. But this particular one, I chose this one for two reasons. One, it's a little bit more of a kind of a folk feeling to it. And secondly, and most importantly for the purposes of this exhibition, is that it depicts various aspects or various moments in Lincoln's life. And everywhere from his birthplace and all the way down to his days in Washington, D.C. So some of these are happy memories, some of them are more tragic, like when his son Willie died at the White House. But there's this wonderful
where do
one.
we have that one down? Is it down here?
That's the one down there.
Yeah, at the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah. This is precious when you think about all these moments. And then just up and to the right of that, we've got him. I like this one because he's on his flatboat. This would have been around, well, on the trip through New Salem.
Correct.
When he got his boat stuck and then decided to come back.
Yes. Yep.
Really interesting. And over here, more sculpture. This is an interesting piece here. This piece from Hager Potteries in Macomb.
Right. This is 1987. This is Hager Pottery, as you mentioned, and this was commissioned by Governor Thompson. It was part of the Build Illinois project. An interesting part of this, we see a very recognizable young Abraham Lincoln with his axe. And what's a little unusual is what he's standing on.
Yeah, because that's not a rail. That's a beam.
It is a beam, and if you look towards the back, it's actually a tree trunk behind it. So it goes from one thing to another thing.
From a whole period of time, from one period to another.
Exactly. Yeah. So that whole kind of notion of Build Illinois and moving ahead into the future.
Neat. Now, a lot of people in Central Illinois know Preston Jackson. Well, people all over the world know Preston Jackson,
Absolutely.
But he works out of Peoria.
Yes.
And this makes this piece really fascinating. I guess this was commissioned for when the new museum opened, the Presidential Museum?
When the Presidential Museum opened, yes. It was a project under the auspices of the Capital Development Board. And Preston created this as a maquette for what was supposed to be an outdoor frieze above up higher, where it would have been cast in bronze. But he did this it's painted, it's acrylic on panel. It shares some scenes that are the same as what we saw in that quilt.
Here he's getting married here, betrothed here.
Correct.
And up above, of course, the debates with Stephen Douglas.
That's right.
And then over here you can see, well, he becomes aware now of the slave, the plight of the slaves,
Right.
and this would have been about the time he went to New Orleans as a young man, I
That's
guess,
correct.
and saw the slave trade.
That's
and
right.
then Frederick Douglass over here,
The debates.
them conferring, yeah. And of course, when the first black soldiers
Right.
joined the Union Army, wow.
So he has taken and sort of collaged all of these images. And one of the things that's interesting about this is he really has created this imagery on his own also. It's not based off of any historic imagery that I've ever been able to associate with it. But it really is, it's like a textile where all of these images are just very carefully woven together to kind of create
Like
this
a
overall
quilt.
story.
Like a
a
quilt.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And look how it ends.
And it ends with the funeral train that brought Lincoln's body back from Washington, D.C. to Springfield for him to be buried. The way that this is set up in the exhibition, there is an object directly over it that is an historic
right up here.
object. Yeah, this necklace that you see is it's interesting because of the story behind it. it at one time would have had a black onyx pendant attached to it. Those little rings are made out of human hair, and which was very popular at that time period, particularly for what's known as mourning jewelry. Mourning in terms of M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G.
Right.
And this particular necklace was purchased by Sally Logan Lehman, who was the wife of Ward Lehman, who was Lincoln's bodyguard. She purchased this in Washington, D.C. specifically to wear on the train ride back, in the train that brought Lincoln's body back from Washington, D.C. to Springfield. And it's quite likely she also wore it during the funeral as well.
And as we finish here with this snapshot of Lincoln's life, this is a rather dramatic painting that was painted in 1963, I guess.
1963, and the story behind this and its companion pieces, that was a series of paintings that were done around 1963. 1963 marked the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And in Chicago, at McCormick Place, they had a large exposition based on that very important event in African American history. And there were several artists that were commissioned to do these series of paintings that outlined specific moments in African American history. Two of those paintings reflected Lincoln, and so that was part of the story that wanted to be told. It's an interesting painting. Al Parker was a Chicago artist. So it was done for Chicago, in Chicago, and done in kind of an impressionist painting kind of way. It's a beautiful painting.
Him as a young man in New Salem.
In New Salem,
Yep.
correct.
Jim, this section of the exhibit represents the iconic Lincoln. You know, we all have images of Lincoln in our heads from growing up and seeing drawings and paintings and photographs of him through the years, and so we all have images of him, you know, and that's what this was all about, because all these images are so different. And I love one of the quotes that you have here. Lincoln's quote says, "I cannot see why all of you artists want a likeness of me unless it's because I am the homeliest man in the state of Illinois." And he was very self-deprecating, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. And that was actually said to a photographer in Peoria. And one of the things that I found very interesting in doing research for this exhibition was that Lincoln was the most photographed person of his time.
Wow.
And you know, there's thoughts on both sides of the fence in terms of whether he did that intentionally or whether it was just a result of his growing importance and running for president. And it could be a combination
and the
of all those
blossoming of
things.
photography, because it was
That's
a new
right.
art.
It was a fairly new art form, and so, but what really intrigued me is that even though there are many different images of Lincoln, so many of them are really based on those photographs that were taken during his lifetime. So in this section of the exhibition, I wanted to choose some of the objects that connect with those kind of early images of Lincoln.
As long as we're looking at this statue, this white statue,
Yes.
Why was this included?
Well, this is a plaster statue. It is a smaller version of a bronze one done by Laredo Taft, who is a premier sculptor in Illinois, has sculptures all over the state, all over the country as far as that goes. And the bronze version is in Urbana in Carl Park. But there were several of these reduced-sized ones that were created, and one of them actually was included in the Chicago World's Fair in 1933. We don't think it was this one, but this is another version of it.
This is the young prairie lawyer.
That's right.
He was riding the circuit
and
going all over central Illinois.
That's right.
And this would be him. It looks like he's standing either in court or at a courthouse.
And that's exactly what he wanted to capture. Was he is about, you can see that he's very composed, self-composed, he's ready to make his arguments, and he is without a beard, which in this exhibition there are images of Lincoln where he is both bearded and not bearded.
Right.
And the not bearded are his earlier days. Generally his time in Springfield before he left for Washington shows him when he did not have a beard. So,
from that we know that when we look at this bearded piece here, and this is a very unusual piece of art. Talk about folk art. It looks like Mr. Richards, Frank Pearson Richards, who created this, just sort of went around the backyard and found out what he could find, and then he just started to carve around on it a little bit.
Well, Frank was very much a very strong American. He believed in, you know, the presidents as really doing good things for the country, and he wanted to commemorate that. He made several of these sculptures, these folk art sculptures. George Washington, he did one of General Grant, this one of Lincoln, and what he would do is he would take these and he would sometimes he would stick flags in them, and for holidays like 4th of July, Memorial Day, he would either put them out on his front porch or in his yard, or put them in wagons and ride them in
wheel
parades.
them through the parade. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. So he was a patriot, and that was his way of showing that.
That's neat.
So.
This particular one was a gift of Bob Church from Rochester, and Frank Pearson Richards was also from Rochester.
He was born in Rochester, and then later came to Springfield. Yes.
Now these two, you wouldn't think they're even the same man, but these are original paintings. One, the top one by Jesse Atwood, and the bottom one by an unknown artist. But these are also bearded, so these are late. These are after the election.
Well, the Jesse Atwood one is probably right on the cusp of.
And that's the top one, right?
That's the top one. Yeah. Jesse Atwood was a Philadelphia artist, painter, who came to Springfield specifically to paint Lincoln's portrait. And now this one is not the one, is not the Atwood painting that received recognition in the State Journal Register, which lauded Atwood's painting of Lincoln, but Atwood ran into a little bit of a problem. He was trying to really keep on top of things, and after he completed the portrait, it was just days after that Lincoln decided to start growing a beard. And so Atwood went back in and painted, added
your
the beard.
worst nightmare. Somebody grows a beard after
Exactly.
you've already done your portrait.
And one of the things artists always need to learn when enough is enough, and not to keep working on something, because it can go the opposite direction. It can go worse, and that's what happened. This was probably one that was done after the fact. Artists would do that, create, so not in the presence of Lincoln.
Yes. And then on this side, this is kind of cute. We've got these. People were creating dolls, even then, of serious people.
Right.
And these are very interesting. I particularly like the one on the right, because this looks like this might have been for sale in a souvenir shop or something.
And that's exactly why it was created. That was made right here in Springfield. It was, this is 1960, 1970, and it has the characteristic stove pipe hat on him, and also the shawl. And Lincoln was often shown or seen wearing a shawl. This one is particularly colorful, but yeah, that's probably the one on the left-hand side is by Bernard Ravka, who was a very well-known French doll maker, and this came directly from his collection.
He looks European there, doesn't he?
He does, yes.
And finally, these two paintings over here, when you're talking about the iconic Lincoln, these are very moody. These are very moody pieces, particularly this one, because you can see, okay, these are the White House years, probably in the dark times of the war when things were not going well, and you get the feeling of despair from looking at this.
Absolutely, yeah. This depicts Lincoln closer to the end of his life, a very war-weary Lincoln. You can almost feel the weight that's on his shoulders in this painting. His eyes are downcast. In the background, there's just a hint of something burning in the background. And if you look at his forehead is really quite telling. When you look at it very closely, you'll see a very faint image of a cross on his forehead. This was made by Douglas
Volk.
Douglas Volk, who actually sat on Lincoln's lap before he died, of course, and when his father, Leonard Volk, was another artist who made very famous interpretations of Lincoln.
Oh boy!
And the one on the far right on this wall is the most recent one. This was done in 1994. This particular painting I find quite ghostly. Again, it is based on a photograph we have on the label next to it. is one of the historic photographs of Lincoln, and you can see how the artist has used that as a starting point for the painting, but has gone in his own way. It's that white background, in contrast to the one we just looked at, that very dark background, makes this very ethereal, I think very ghost-like.
Yeah, it's almost like he's in the afterlife.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And the image that's between them up above, the profile, that is the profile that, again, is based on a photograph. It's the same profile that we see on the penny, and which was first minted in 1909 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth.
Sometimes you find Lincoln where you don't expect to find Lincoln, don't you, Jim?
And that was one of the intriguing things about putting this exhibition together, is looking not only in more traditional sources, but other ways where we can find Lincoln. And so some of the objects we have in here are Lincoln in unusual ways, see him in unusual ways, like this piece. By Adolph George Colin, who was an outsider artist who just passed away this past year.
He lived up at Salisbury, didn't he?
Correct, correct. And he did a lot of, he's probably better known for his two-dimensional pieces, but he also did some three-dimensional pieces like this. This would have been created as a lawn ornament, and it's of this wonderful holiday tree, but the trunk is made up of Lincoln stacked one on top of the other.
That's clever.
And this is actually just came into the collection. Just in time for this exhibition.
That is
so
neat.
We're thrilled to have
and just
that.
about the time when George passes away too. So you have a real item there, don't you?
Absolutely.
And this is interesting. What are we looking at? The New Salem area here?
Yes. Now, you might be wondering why we have a landscape in an exhibition about Lincoln, but it's kind of a Where's Waldo? You have to really look closely. And if you look on the left-hand side in that cluster of three trees there, way up
remove
high.
the suspense and point at it.
Right there, yes. There is, shown in the painting, there is a profile of Lincoln that's been carved into that tree. Now, that carving was made by the artist when he was a younger man, and he went back and then made the painting of this. The reason that it is significant, this particular location, is that those three trees mark the place in New Salem where Lincoln had his general store.
Really?
And the trees are not there any longer. They have been removed, but so it's kind of historic significance as well. And so again, finding Lincoln in unexpected places.
Yeah, and another unexpected place you wouldn't expect it would be in this wreath, probably hanging, maybe on a fireplace or a door or something in a Victorian household, right?
Exactly.
But these hair wreaths were very popular.
They were extremely popular, and almost always shown in shadow boxes like you see here. It's all of the floral parts of that are made up of human hair, and these were objects that young women in the family often created. Usually to indicate their skill levels at making things that would embellish or decorate the home. So this is something that they would have been taught. The wreath shape is usually in a horseshoe shape like this one, open at the top, and some of these wreaths were made using the hair of family members who had passed on. So that open horseshoe was, the concept of that was to let the spirits rise and go out of it. Now this particular example is a little bit different. The young woman who created this, Ellen Willie was her name, her family lived close to the Lincolns in Springfield, and their custom was whenever somebody would come to visit in their home, they would request of their guests to leave a lock of their hair. And that included Abraham Lincoln. And so there is a lock somewhere in here of Abraham Lincoln's hair in this particular wreath.
Very interesting. Now, about that, shortly after his, well, not shortly after, but sometime after his death, the Illinois Watch Company became an international company. People were wearing Illinois watches made in Springfield all over the world.
Right.
And they wanted a Lincoln watch.
In fact, they had a line of Lincoln watches that were prepared. Those were the real high-end watches. And so they commissioned an artist by the name of Rudolph Boeneck to create a portrait of Lincoln. Boeneck used a photograph of Lincoln that was taken during his lifetime as the basis for it. Cropped the image just to show his face, but this became an advertising campaign, and the idea of the honesty of the company as well as the honesty of the 16th president.
Okay.
So
now we'll see this same photograph over here on this.
On the child's plate.
On this child's plate, if
Right.
you look closely, this would be taken from the same photograph. And what these are little household items where you wouldn't expect to see Lincoln, but he was everywhere for a while. There wasn't
he was, and not just in this country as well. Now, the plate that you pointed out is the child's plate. It has the ABCs around the outside of it. That's how we know it was made for a child. So. It was an educational tool as well to introduce young members of the family to the 16th president. The small mug was actually made in England, produced in England. It's a sweet little thing. Yeah. So this was something, and the blue plate was made in Holland. So that imagery of Lincoln extended far beyond the U.S. borders.
Wow.
And Lincoln Logs, some of your viewers might remember, I remember playing with Lincoln Logs when I was a kid. Now they don't have Lincoln on it, but certainly caused his name. Those were, by the way, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright's son. Lincoln Logs
Intriguing.
were. Yes.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
And as you enter and leave remembering Lincoln, you will not miss William Schwartz's painting, The Emancipator. It is a symbolic history of the human race with Abraham Lincoln, as you can see, at its pinnacle. Remembering Lincoln is open through May 17th. With another Illinois story in Springfield at the Illinois State Museum, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of the program you've just seen, send $19.95 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, subject, and when the program aired. You can also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605.